Okay, so this is hopefully the final part of this video on making a crate, and we're going to texture it. So I finished off the normal map bit and decided to put some damage down the side here into the normal map, or some kind of wear and tear on the wood. I don't think I've done anything else to the normal map. So I've rebaked my ambient occlusion out of Endo, and this is what we've got. So I've put my UVs into this as well, and I've also saved it as crate, as a diffuse file, so a new PSD. I've just put my ambient occlusion, the three files that we had, so the AO baked from our high poly, then the AO from Endo 2 and the cavity from Endo 2. I've just put those into a folder called AO just so they're out of the way, and I've set all of them to either be multiply or overlay. Okay, so I've also gone on to CG textures and found some textures to use. So I found this wood texture, which I think is fairly close to this wood texture. The biggest difference would be that obviously the colour's quite different, but we can sort that out. I found a metal texture, which again is fairly similar to this metal, and I found some rust, which is not a million miles away from this rust here. So I'm going to get my wood texture, and I'll choose this medium-sized one. So we're working at 2048 by 2048, so we need to fill in a gap. It's about half that size for this piece of wood here, so this one should be okay. I'll download the 1600 one, open that in Photoshop, and then what I want to do is just to get my marquee tool, and I'll grab this bit of the texture. So I'll copy that, make a new layer, and paste that in. So that's the new layers underneath the AO and underneath, obviously the UVs are at the top so we can see what we're doing. And then I can just scale that down. So I'm holding shift here to scale that uniformly. And I'm just going to match that up with where the AO disappears. So if we have a look at this texture, you can see there's already some wear in this coming into the edges here and along here, and that's why we want to match it up so that we've already got the wear in the left and the right hand side in the right positions. So we need to copy this down a bit as well and put another one underneath so we've got enough to fill this. Let me just put so that we've got enough to fill this side in. And we'll just get rid of our AO for the moment so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get rid of, we don't want these bolts in here because we haven't got those bolts in our crate, and we haven't got a normal map to support those bolts, so we don't want those, and we also don't want these the dark lines where the slats are, because we've already got that ourselves from our AO map. So to get rid of those, what we'll do is we'll merge these together, and then we can just start painting them out. So if we get our clone stamp tool here, and we can just hit Alt to clone a bit and then paint it in to get rid of those areas. And we want to get rid of all of these bits as well. Do this with a bit more care than I'm doing it now. What we also want to do is make sure we've got no repeating patterns, so things like this area here around there is repeating there, and that's going to be really obvious in our map. So either use a unique texture all the way through, or if you do copy and paste a bit, make sure that any patterns like that are obviously repeating, make sure you just paint those out. So it should take about 5 or 10 minutes to do this. I've already got one that I did before, so when you're finished you should have something like this. And what we want to do with this now is, first of all, let's put our AO back over the top, save that, and load this into Marmoset. Okay, so this is how we're looking. And the wood generally looks okay, but if we look at our reference, it's a really, really different colour. It's not a massively different style of wood, but it is a really, really different colour. So we need to fix that. So to do that in Photoshop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer, because I don't want to, just in case I don't like what I do, I want that layer to go back to. And then I'm going to hit Control U on with this layer selected to go to my hue and saturation. And I'm going to basically try and use these to get more of the colour that I'm after. So I think I'm going to increase the saturation quite a lot. Again, there's my reference. That looks okay. So that's a decent start. Looking at this, we've got quite a big problem with this though. We've got areas that have, when we've increased our saturation, we've got these areas that have gone really purple. And I quite like the purple, a little bit of it, because it makes the texture a bit more interesting and it's quite nice, but it's there's far too much of it, it's far too purple. So we'll just go to our hue saturation again, so Control U to bring that up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate those purple bits and get rid of them. So instead of doing all of my hues at the same time, I'm just going to go down to the magentas, and I can use this. So anywhere that's within within this zone, so from this kind of blue up to these reds here, that's now going to be controlled by these controls in here. So you can see as I'm moving that down, it's starting to affect some of these blue areas. So I think that needs to be a little wider. Okay, so I'm just going to pull the saturation of these down a little. Like that. Okay, so that's just got rid of a bit of that blue. It's quite subtle, but it does definitely make a difference. What I'll also do is I'll just make so I want to make this all a little bit more yellow as well, so I'm just going to make another copy of this, and this time I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to colorize it, and I'm just going to pick that kind of yellow color that I want in there. Okay, and then I'm just going to fade the opacity of this down until I get something that I'm happy with. So this is what we had originally, and this is what we've got now, which is much closer to our reference. Obviously, it doesn't have to, in this case, this doesn't need to be identical to our reference. We just want to get something that's reasonably close. And it just needs to look nice and realistic. So let's save that and have a look in Marmoset. definitely looking a bit better. And in fact, that's pretty close, so I'll keep that how it is for now. I just need to make sure that I copy this into all the other areas that have got wood in them. So let's just duplicate those and merge them, and then copy that down here, copy it up into that bit, and I believe this strip here is also wood, so I just need to make sure that my wood grain is going the right way for that. And I'll just scale that out. You shouldn't really scale things up as it'll pull the texture, but I'm being lazy. Okay, I think that's all. So sorry, yeah, I just need to, obviously these bits of metal, so let's just get rid of the texture out of there. And I believe that's all of the areas. Let's just check that. So, yep, it looks like everything that should be wood is now got a wood texture on it. Okay, so that's the basic wood texture down. Let's get our basic metal texture down as well, and then we'll start to detail these textures. So back in Photoshop, I want to go and grab a metal texture now. So this is the one that I found that I'm going to use, and I think I will use this one. So just grab that, and let's just grab this piece out of here, copy that, and paste it into there. Okay, save that. Let's have a look. So you can see that that metal texture is not a million miles off this at all. It's pretty decent as a base, and I think that's all right. Possibly this texture needs to be a little bit darker, maybe. So I might just come into Photoshop and just alter my level. So I'm just hitting Control L on that. Now maybe just darken it a tiny bit. Yeah, I think that's closer. Okay, so this is our basic texture, and I know a lot of people will get to this point and call this done, and you know that'll be the end of it and go on to the next thing. I would say this texture is about 10% done, 20% done maybe. We really need to put a lot more detail into this to bring it to life. So if we have a look at our reference image again, these areas where the rivets are really damaged and rusty. All of these corners up here are rusty as well. There's mud or something in here, kind of a splatter of mud. Across the bottom, we're starting to get erosion and rust into the bottom. If we have a look at the wood, we've got, you know, the areas where the lettering is slightly more worn away than other areas of the wood. All in these sides here, we've got sort of dirt and grime and mud, and the wood is much darker in these areas. Again in here, there's kind of splatters of mud around this area here where the crate's been handled, so people's sweaty hands have been sitting on the crate. You're starting to get some more grime and dirt as well. So all of this is what we need to focus on now and start to paint in, and this is what's going to really bring our model to life and make it look like a real thing and like a piece of art rather than just a boring 3D model. Okay, so the first thing we'll look at is the wood, and the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get all of my wood layers and I'm just going to merge them together, actually, just so that they're all, just so that I only have that one thing to worry about. So our texture is really simple at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to start with this wood, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in some of these dark areas and the areas where there's grime. So as with all things like this, there's loads of ways you can go about it. In this case, I'm going to use the burn tool, I think. So I'm just going to make a copy of that layer so that I've always got a clean one to go back to. And then I'm going to go and get my burn tool here. We'll set the range to mid-tones, that should be fine. We can play with these later if they're not working. And then I'm just going to start to use this to paint in some dark areas. So I'm going to paint them definitely into these cracks. You can imagine where the cracks in this wood are. When this has got wet, the wetness is going to stay there for longer, and it's going to kind of dampen the wood and just make it have a darker feel to it. So I'm definitely going to paint that into those areas. I'm also going to paint a little bit coming out of those areas as well, and also darken some of these edges up as well. So I would recommend you get a tablet for doing this. I'm just doing it with a mouse at the moment because I'm recording my screen, but I'm definitely going to paint in a lot of darkness into the areas where these cracks are here. So I'm keeping my AO turned on for this so that I can see what I'm doing, and I'm definitely going to paint in quite a bit of darkness coming into the edges as well. Okay, so I'll just pause the video and I'll go through and do that. Okay, so I've painted in those darker areas. I've even painted in some actual marks for where the fingers might have been sitting on this. So this is looking okay, I think. Let me just save it and have a look in Marmoset. Okay, so that's what it looks like with that on, and it is looking more interesting now. It's definitely looking like a more interesting texture, but that is a bit extreme. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm just going to reduce the opacity of that down. So we've still got this old one underneath, and I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this down to blend it in. Kind of like that. Okay, so this was before, and this is after. So the effect is definitely subtle, but it does make a big difference. It does add quite a lot to the look of this. What I'm also going to do, I think, is I'm going to do the opposite of that. So I'm going to get my dodge tool, and then I'm going to paint in some slightly lighter bits, maybe around where the writing is. So it's kind of got smoothed away a bit there. Okay, so I finished that off, and this is how it was before. And this is how it is now. So I've just painted in some light areas as well as some dark areas, which just gives it a bit more interest. And the important thing is that I'm painting these areas. I'm not just painting them randomly. I'm painting areas of light in where I think the wood might have got smoothed down a bit through wear, and to highlight some areas that I want to highlight a bit. So areas like these letters. So again, that was, well, this was it without anything painted on. Then this is it with the dark bits painted on, and then that's it with the dark bits and the light bits painted on. So we've gone from that to that. So let's save this and have a look. And that's starting to look a lot more interesting now to look at, or at least I think it's starting to look more interesting. So maybe I'd go through again now and paint in a little more wear at the top. There's a bit of a seam there actually. I think I just need to actually clone and stamp that out here a bit. And I'm going to get my dodge tool and paint in a bit of highlight, I think, on that top edge as well. So I think it's going to definitely, the wood's going to got smoothed down quite a bit on that top edge, which is why I'm painting in the highlight up there. Save that. That's better. And okay, that looks alright. I think that's mostly the wood done now. We can maybe try increasing the opacity of that bit, see if we want some more of that. I think it was better where it was actually. Okay, so that's the wood done. I think I'm happy enough with where that is. So let's move on to the metal. Okay, so the metal, the main thing that we need in this, definitely need some bits of dirt and detail, but the most important thing here is probably the areas that have gone rusty. So we want to paint those in. And again, we're not just putting random rust all over this, although we might want a bit of random rust because we've got these little specks in here. But we want to paint this rust into all of the corners and the edges and the areas where it started to erode. So what I'm going to do is go to CG Textures again and get my rust texture, which is going to be this one, and again I'm going to get that at 1600 resolution. Then I shall copy that in over the top of my metal. I just want to make sure that I'm getting the scale of this about right in comparison to the metal. So I think about there looks good. So I'm just going to flip that one vertically so that we get rid of that seam. It doesn't matter that you can see the symmetry in there because we're going to paint this out of most of the areas, and then I'll merge those together. And just to make sure I'm not overlapping anything that I shouldn't do, I'm going to control click on the metal that we had, so that'll select that as a mask, and then I can invert that. So control shift and I to invert it and then delete it. Okay, so if we look in Marmoset 2 now, we've just got rust in all these areas that we did have metal. Okay, so the rust for me isn't quite the right colour. If I have a look at the rust that's on my reference image, the rust needs to be a bit more red, a bit darker, and a bit less saturated as well, I think. So let's just fix that. I'm going to make a copy of this again, just in case I don't like what I do with it. And then I'm just going to go to my hue saturation again. I think I'm going to make it a little bit more red. I'm definitely going to desaturate it a bit. And I might make it a little darker as well. Okay, I think about there is probably going to be good. So I can actually save that and just have a look. And that's a little better. It's maybe gone, I've maybe gone a bit too red with it. So I'll just go back a bit the other way. And that'll do. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to create a mask now for this. So down at the bottom, I'm just going to click the Add Layer Mask button. And then I'm going to get my fill tool and I'm going to get black to fill it with, and I'm just going to fill that. So I've not filled the image, I've just filled the mask there. Now if I get a brush, a white brush, and make sure that I've got my mask selected on this, then I can start to paint away that mask, and as I paint away that mask it will expose that rust behind it. Okay, so the idea here is now to paint in the rust into the correct areas, which is going to be a case of coming in and painting the rust around these screw holes and up at the top here, around these a little bit. So if I just save that to give you an idea of what we're doing, you can see we're now hand painting in the rust into the correct areas. But this obviously looks really bad. So what we need to do is we need to find a way of painting this in a way that looks a little bit more like rust getting exposed. So this is a case of experimentation, and depending on what you're doing, you might want to set this up a little bit differently. But the main thing is going to be to get a brush that's going to work. So I'm going to try one of these kind of scratchy brushes here. See if one of those works. Yeah, that actually will work, I think. So just find a brush that you think is going to give you a good effect for this, and then you can start to paint with that brush. So if you're liking what's happening, then obviously keep it white to expose it, and you can always press X to go to your black and paint out some of those areas, so we can soften this down a little. Maybe we can get rid of the rust right on the inside and then paint a bit more into the edges. So again, use a tablet for this if you have one. If you don't have one, then you can maybe use a mouse like I am, but it's going to be quite hard work doing this without a tablet. But I'm just going to paint in a little bit for now to give the idea. So if I save that now and come into Marmoset 2, you can see that that's working a lot better now than it was before. It still needs a lot more work, but the way that the rust is being exposed through is looking better. You can also maybe come in here and try using some things like a inner glow for this. Sometimes that works quite well if you get the inner glow with a colour that matches the rust that you've got. can even put a little bit of noise into that. So I think that's working quite well with the colour burn. But I'm just messing around here. With these settings, so I recommend you do the same and find something that gives you a nice rusty effect. If you're painting in scratches, you might want to do this a little bit differently. But I'd quite like the effect that I'm getting there. I just want to make sure this is reasonably subtle. Yeah, that's working pretty well. Looking at this on the 3D model, we obviously have a big problem that we haven't actually set up our materials yet. So the rust in this is shining in the same way that the metal is, which is making the rust look really fake. I mean, it all looks, you know, none of this looks very realistic at the moment because the materials aren't set up correctly. If I were to set that up correctly, I'd want to, for the metal, I'd want the metalness to be up full, and then we'll need our gloss in the right area, which we'll set up all through maps later on. But you know, this might be set up okay now for the metal, so that's looking not too bad for the metal. But once we get to the area that are rust, we'll want to bring down more like this, so we've got the contrast between the two. But just go through and paint in your rust, and I'll do that now, and I'll pause this video and come back once that's done. Alright, so I've painted in some of that rust. I think I could spend a bit longer doing this, but it will do as a demonstration. This is how it's looking in Marmoset now. So we've got these areas, you know, the rust is basically painted into the areas where you'd expect it to form, so into all of these corners, particularly around where these rivets are along the bottom, basically all the areas that we looked at before we started doing this and thought they should have rust in. Okay, so that's that done. The next thing that I'm going to do is, we've also got some just random bits of rust throughout this, so I want to get a texture to use for that. Okay, so this is the texture that I'm going to use. Again, it's just another one from CG Textures, so you can find it yourself. You can find this one yourself, or you can find a similar one. And I'm just going to download that and open it up. And let's just find a bit of this that we want to use. So maybe this bit around here. Take that and copy it in. I'll just copy that about a little, like that. I'll merge all of those together, and I might just go through my clone stamp tool as well and just get rid of those seams quickly, or you can just copy a bigger piece out. Probably would have been the better thing to do, but I've done it this way, so I'll leave it like that. Okay, what I want to do now is just to double click on this, and we can use our blend if options. So I basically want to say I want to keep it if it's the orange color, and I want to get rid of it if it's blue. So let's change that to blue, and let's just say if it's blue, go away, and if it's not, keep it. So you can see as I'm moving that down, it's getting rid of all that blue and it's keeping the rust in there. If I hit Alt, I can separate those two little sliders, so I can bring back some of the rusty areas now and just get these to sit nicely. Something like that. Okay, so that should do for that, I think. And for this, I'm just going to copy that over to the other parts as well, actually. Which is a bit of a lazy way of doing it, but there we go. So if I mean, you know, I might think that there's too much of this, in which case I could just stick a mask on it again and just get my brush and paint away some of the bits that I don't like the look of. So if I think it's a bit too much of this rust, then I can just paint those areas away. Okay, I'm going to keep it like that. Maybe paint some of this out a bit. Okay, and that's just added a bit of that random rust into it. So it's looking a bit better again. What else do we need to do? So we've also got some mud on this. So let's find a texture for some mud. Okay, so I'm actually just going to use this kind of concrete texture here. It's just got some blotches on it, which will be easy to use as mud. So let's just get that and copy that and paste that in. I'm going to rotate it this way and just position it where I want it. So about there looks good. And again, double click on that, and I want to get rid of this if it's white and keep those areas that aren't white. So like something like that. Okay, the only problem with this is the mud that we've got on there was a bit more kind of a orangey colour. So what I'm going to do is I want to keep the changes that I've done to this now. So I'm just going to create a new empty layer and then put that empty layer under the layer I've just made and merge those layers together. And now if I double click on this now, this blend diff has basically been merged down. So now I can just use my colour tools and maybe increase the saturation a little. And then just find something that I like. So something like that looks okay. And now it just looks like we've got some splodges of mud or something on top of it. So that's probably a bit extreme. I'll just bring the opacity of that down. And I think change the colour of that a bit as well. Make it a bit more yellow so that it looks different to the rust. It's more like it. Okay, I think we're pretty much there now with the texturing for this. So just quickly, I'm actually totally happy with the, I'm just going to burn that back in a bit at the top there. But just to quickly show what we've done here, we started off with our just our wood and our metal, our base textures like this, which looked like that. And what we've done is we've just added in some really simple little details into this. Like so, and that's the difference that it's made. So it's just looking a lot more interesting now, a much more visually appealing piece of work. I'm going to stop this video here because again it's ended up being really long, and in the final video, which will definitely be the final video, we're going to create the metallic map and the gloss map, or the micro surface map, and those are the things that are really going to make this look like a real crate.